Everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Denise Brown. I'm the Executive Director of the Leeway Foundation, and I use she, her pronouns. On behalf of everyone at Leeway, I'm thrilled to welcome you to the launch of Transforming Inclusion and Organizational Guide. We are grateful to have the support of our partners, the Philanthropy Network of Greater Philadelphia, Culture Works Greater Philadelphia, there's a lot of gators, the Greater Philadelphia Cultural Alliance, and the William Way LGBT Community Center. They're helping to sponsor today's event, so I really appreciate that. We also appreciate the support of the City of Philadelphia's Office of LGBT Community Affairs and its leader, Amber Heights. Amber's philosophy closely aligns with Leeway's, that when we fight for the lives of the most marginalized, we in turn liberate ourselves. Amber, would you join me in welcoming folks and say a few words?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
It's not often that you're in a room where you don't have to say that twice, so I appreciate that. My name is Amber Heights, and I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of LGBTQ Affairs for the City of Philadelphia. I bring you greetings from Mayor Jim Kinney in City Hall, where my office works for equal living and working conditions for LGBTQ Philadelphians 365 days a year. It's an thank you. Javita, thank you. Javita's one of my colleagues in City Hall. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with you this afternoon and to partner with Leeway Foundation on this Transforming Inclusion event. So often the work of Leeway and Leeway artists challenges us to reconsider how we take accountability for our roles in society as we examine the many intersections of our identities. Over the years, Leeway, trans, gender nonconforming, and non-binary artists have raised our collective consciousness. Their stories and the stories of their communities have pushed us all towards greater inclusion through awareness and accountability. Today's event marks the continuation of essential conversations regarding access and affirmation for our trans, GNC, and non-binary communities. Today we take a crucial step forward in expanding these discussions to those who need to engage in them the most. With these discussions, we continue our fight for equitable access and representation for those who remain the most marginalized. As we move forward this afternoon, let us remember that discomfort is a necessary part in radical change. That we must not only join the fight, but we must actively challenge ourselves on our experiences of our own privilege. It is our responsibility to ask ourselves how we can utilize our privileges, whether it's our race, our class, our gender identity, our age, our ability, our region, our education, to create spaces where marginalized voices can be centered and elevated. And so this afternoon, I ask that all of us who are here and privileged to be in this space think about what we can do to show up as intersectional allies and accomplices for trans, gender nonconforming, and non-binary folks. But also how we can show up for people of color, for women, for immigrants, for people living with disabilities, for people experiencing homelessness or poverty, and that we consider our positions of privilege as we listen to the conversation between these inspiring individuals. I'm grateful to witness this discussion with my esteemed colleagues and all of you on the panel and our inspirational partners here today. It's their work and their message that inspires me and makes the work of my office easier and more hopeful. So the Office of LGBT Affairs is proud to partner in this important conversation, and we will continue to stand proudly in solidarity with the people and the voices that need to be heard the most. To our transgender, non-binary, and gender nonconforming communities, we see you, we love you, and we stand with you today and always. Thank you.
We have a technical. How's that?
Great. Hi.
Hi. All right, great. In 2005, Kavita Rajana and Walida Imarisha, who were Leeway's program staff at the time, advocated for the foundation to expand its eligibility criteria to include trans and gender nonconforming people. The thinking was that if Leeway's support of women artists was an expression of its intention to support artists who were marginalized because of their gender, those who identified outside of the binary were the most marginalized. After considerable discussion among staff, board, and the advisory council, the foundation changed its criteria, and beginning in 2006, women, trans, and gender nonconforming artists were eligible to apply. We quickly discovered that this was about much more than changing guidelines or adding a checkbox on an application, and began to ask ourselves how to go about creating an organizational culture that was welcoming to all the members of our community, which led us to a process of educating ourselves about the experience of folks who claim these identities. And I just want to say, we are certainly not positing ourselves as experts today because this is an ongoing process. It's just sort of a marker in our ongoing learning process. So we've been at this for 12 years, and I've worked with artists, trainers, partners, and others locally and nationally who are willing to share information, expertise, and in some cases, their personal stories. Initially, we sought ways to be better about recruiting trans and non-binary folks to apply for grants, really reflecting on our organizational culture and the symbols that grow out of that culture. By creating an inclusive visual identity, one that didn't express the binary, and by reviewing the language we were using internally and externally. We began to search the internet to find information and the online presence of trans and non-binary artists, artist organizers, historians, and cultural producers. We sought to make sure that there was a representation within the foundation, on our funding panels, on our board, among paid workers. We developed a set of materials we call our trans inclusion documents, materials we use to orient review panels and facilitators that offers up considerations and shared language within the context of social justice, gender self-determination, and visions for community transformation. We've refreshed and refined these materials over the years, and more people began to ask us if they could share them or use them within their organizations. And so that's what kind of led us to today. I want to say that this guide is the result of the labor of our very special guest and moderator of this afternoon's conversation, Vee Chaudhry. And Vee actually found us. He contacted Leeway to let us know that he was coming to Philadelphia to conduct research on his dissertation about funding in trans and gender nonconforming communities, and he was looking for a home base, and we were smart enough to say yes. He wondered if Leeway was that place, and it became that place for all of us. He arrived in our office in the summer of 2016. It's remarkable that it was over 2 years ago. And it wasn't long before he had made such an impression on everyone that he was adopted as Leeway's residence and scholar. Scholar in residence? And during the time that Vee was with us, he took on the task of revamping the trans inclusion docs, which we had sort of pulled things from a variety of different resources, and there were a number of organizations that had been generous enough to let us use their intellectual property to put this stuff together. And so Vee's task was to kind of make it a whole in some way. And so what you're either sitting on or holding became this remarkable document that we're releasing today only through your scholarship fee and your generosity. We simply would not have been able to launch this document at this time without Vee's effort and dedication to our mission and vision, and we are very lucky to now and forever call him part of our community. So, thank you. I just want to say briefly, because I think this is my last time on the mic, that I want to thank the Leeway staff, particularly Denise Beek, who organized today's event. And they're quietly standing at the back of the room because they didn't know I was going to do this. Thank you all for being here.
Hey. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes. Thank you so much to everyone for coming out today, and thank you so much to the Leeway Foundation for helping to get me here, and for, especially to Denise Beek for fielding my frantic texts. I had some travel issues getting here, but I'm here with you all from Oregon today, and after a, hell of a morning. So I'm really, really grateful to be in this space, and really, really grateful to be able to introduce our panelists and to have a really great conversation about this really exciting guide that I helped to put together. I think Denise gave a really wonderful introduction to the process that led to this. It's been an ongoing work in progress, ongoing conversation amongst different community members, community partners, Leeway grantees, staff members, volunteers, panelists, all kinds of people. Most of their names are listed in the back, but that's not even everybody who walked in the door through Leeway and had conversations with us about various pieces of this project as it came together. So it's a really exciting document that I think is an attempt to answer a lot of questions that people have in this political moment about what it means to create a welcoming environment, what it means to be affirming towards transgender and nonconforming people, and I think, Amber, in your introduction, I don't know where Amber is, but I really appreciated your mention of just, intersectional allyship and, thinking not just about transgender and nonconforming people themselves, but other folks who are marginalized by race, gender, sexuality, class, ability, etc. Right? And I think this guide is just one way of sort of adding to that conversation. So I'm really grateful to be here. I'm really grateful to have this amazing lineup of folks who all had a hand in various ways of constructing the document. So I'll let them introduce themselves with 1 or 2 sentences about who you are and how you have a relationship to this project. And I also want to take the time to sort of call on our ancestors into the room and say that none of this work happens without the labor of people who've come before us, who are both in this room and not in this room for various reasons. So we're really grateful to, especially here in Philly, there's a huge and rich legacy of trans and gender conforming folks, especially Black trans folks, who have done the labor to make this city the place that it is and make it welcoming towards transgender conforming folks. So I just want to name that and welcome them to the space and allow our panelists to all name an ancestor if they feel comfortable. So we'll start with maybe Allison, if you want to start.
I'm Allison Garrett.
Could you put the mic closer to
Yes.
you, please? Thank you.
I'm Allison Garrett. I'm a little nervous. So I am the former executive director of the Therapy Center of Philadelphia, which provides psychotherapy to low-income women, transgender, and non-binary communities through a social justice lens. And while I was there, we went through a really, really extensive process to become trans-affirming. We were historically white, women's feminist organization, and so, as you can imagine, that brought lots of twists and turns to get to where we are today. And so I'll talk more about that later. I do organizational work now with other organizations around becoming more trans-affirming, and also to look at racial equity work that they're trying to do. And I also am a therapist that works with queer and trans and non-binary communities. And one of the things I just wanted to do in my introduction is when we're working at the agency, we have a tradition of locating ourselves socially, and so I just wanted to do that as well. I identify as white, I'm cisgender, queer, single parent. I grew up in an upper middle class white family in the South, and I just want to name that I got some pushback about being up here today, and I want to own that and bring that in and bring those voices in large part. I think I am up here today because of white supremacy and because of my class background and because of my cisness, and so I want to kind of name that. And also, that is one of the reasons that I did leave my position at the Therapy Center. I really do believe that equity does include us stepping aside and moving over, so I just wanted to put that in. And then in terms of the ancestors, I worked at Mazzoni Center in the early 2000s when it was PCHA, and we were starting up the trans health program there, and there was a white trans man and an African-American trans woman that really, really worked with me very closely, and I consider both elders, and I just want to bring their energy into the room today because I don't think I'd be sitting here without them.
My name is Selena Morrison. I am presently the Director of Programs at William Way LGBT Community Center. I also am a Family Support Specialist for the PACS program at CHOP. And I am a Commissioner on the Commission of Human Relations. I am involved with this. I met V a couple years ago. V was offering to help out with, I was working at the Mazzoni Center at the time. I was running their trans program there, and V was helping me out with some things, and I sat down with V numerous times and had interviews, and been able to let V pick my brain for some of my, for whatever reason, I don't know why anybody. But yeah, that's about it. I don't have any things that I want to mention today.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Heath Fogg Davis, and I use he, him pronouns. Can everybody hear me okay? And I just want to start by saying thank you so much to V for this amazing project. You did a great job. And just also to Leeway in general, everything that this organization does is so aesthetically beautiful. Everything is beautiful, so I really appreciate everything you do. So just a bit about me. I am the new director of the Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies program at Temple. And I'm very excited about this position. I just started over the summer. I also am a political science professor at Temple, which is a little less interesting to me these days. And much more in line with what my research and teaching is about. So I teach courses on discrimination and public policy in the law. And I also served on the Mayor's LGBT Commission for a year with Amber, which was an amazing experience. I also do some consulting work, helping organizations of different kinds become more trans inclusive. So it was really, wonderful to work, together and sort of contribute a little bit to the book, but also to think about the ways in which different organizations demand different strategies. And then last but not least, I was a board member of the Leeway Foundation, which for about 3 years, I believe. And I loved, looking back, as soon as my kids are off to college. 3 and 14 months, that's a little bit of but I learned so much from this organization. I'm a lifelong fan of Leeway, and I tell everybody this organization really walks the talk. And so I think you see this in this book. The guide, the ancestor that I'd like to call into the room today is Charlene Arcilla, who many of you knew. And as you know, Charlene had the gumption to legally challenge SEPTA's discriminatory gender marker policy. So this policy was in effect from 1981 to 2013. And Charlene filed a legal complaint and is largely responsible for bringing down that policy. So we miss her. She also is the founder of the Trans Health Conference, now renamed the Trans Wellness Conference, and I want to give her a shout out for that as well.
I'll let Gabriel Foster introduce himself. He's with us via Skype.
Try to see it. You can see the panel.
Hello. Sorry, I've been listening, but I can only see this much of myself, so it's nice to see your faces. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for letting me join you from Portland, Oregon. I'm so sad that I couldn't be there today, but I'm like, I didn't know I would feel so emotional. Leeway, V, everybody, thank you for your work. Just a little bit about myself. My name is Gabriel Foster. I use he and him. I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Trans Justice Funding Project. We are a community-led funding initiative that funds grassroots, trans-led, trans justice work in the US and Puerto Rico. And a lot of our work was inspired by and
inspired by the Leeway Foundation and my time there as staff in 2009. So I'll talk about it more, but it's incredible to virtually be with you today, having been a staff in 2009 and working to do outreach to bring more trans and gender non-binary people into Leeway and to have done some focus groups with some community members during that time. And now there's just been so much that has happened in between then, and to be here today with you all to debut this guide, I couldn't be more pleased and excited, and also just to be still a part of the Leeway family. So thank you. And the ancestors that I want to bring into the room, as always, is my grandmother Rosetta Givehand, for continuing to be my guide and protecting me, even though she's no longer on this earth. And also, just thinking about this morning, Miss Jackie Adams, who absolutely scandalized me and taught me so much when I first arrived in Philadelphia as the trans advocate and AIDS activist and advocate that she was, and powerhouse and force that she continues to be, I'm sure. So I want to bring her into this room as well. Thank you.
So we clearly have a really, is this on? Yeah. We clearly have a really great group of people, lots of really interesting perspectives in the room. So I'll just jump right into some questions that we have. And every seat has a note card on it. And if you have questions throughout, you can write your questions down on a note card, and Denise B will be collecting those. So just sort of raise your hand with a card if you want to hand that to her, and then when we get to the Q&A, it'll just make it a little bit easier so we have questions in front of us. But I want to start with asking a question to the panel as a whole, and you can sort of, whoever feels so moved can start with answering. But the first question is really, why is this an important guide, and what do you think about the guide is useful for you and your work, and for the work that you see happening in Philadelphia and nationally?
I was just talking to them about why I think it's important. Can you hear me? Okay. Because a lot of organizations that we come in contact with, that we work with, when they say they want to be inclusive, they really don't know what that looks like. And what I find with this guide is it's not a heavy load. It's manageable. So I see it as a great start. Guides like this are a great starting point, but as we all know, our community continues to change all the time. Something that may have been really relevant and been a big deal last year, they're not concerned with this year. There's something new. There's folks are identifying as they want to be. So we have to be open and willing to change. Systematically, a lot of the organizations around have the same folks sitting in positions 15, 20, 25 years, and we know that just does not work. So in those cases, it's great to have a go-to, and that's what I see this guide as, a go-to. In no way, I like the fact that Leeway has that disclaimer that they are not experts, but they have a great system. I love working with them. I never feel othered when I'm there. And I like the fact that this guide shows people what inclusion looks like outside of bathrooms and pronouns.
Yeah, just to kind of echo what Selena said, I think it's a great starting place, and also what you said about this process being a journey. It's not a one and done kind of thing, and I think that the guide does a really good job of laying that out. I also really appreciated the in their own words sections, and based on these interviews, Allison, I thought that your words were really powerful when you talked about that it was a hard process and that you will grieve, and I thought that was interesting and important to kind of put out there. And also, I thought that Chris Bartlett's work that he talked about one policy that they've adopted a rolling way about ensuring that all the finalists for every job includes people of color and trans people, and then you start, you let the cards fall and make some decisions there. So I like that because I think that there's no one size fits all for every organization, but these are examples of things that you can think about, and whether that makes sense in your own organization or how you might sort of, adjust it a little bit. So I thought the tone was really great. It's not heavy-handed. This is what you must do in order to be trans-inclusive. Here are some thoughts about what other people have done for you to think about. So I think as a structure, a place to start to begin that, not just a conversation, but like actually, like, what if we did this? Or what if we tried that? Is really good.
Look to you, Gabriel.
Sure. I actually have a little bit longer of an answer. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to tell like a brief story. Like nearly 10 years ago, when I was staff and doing outreach, as I mentioned before, on behalf of Leeway to find and invite and welcome in trans and gender nonconforming people, I heard about this place called Washington West. It's a community center. So it was like pre-smartphone days, so I was lost, it was hot, it was summer, and I finally found Washington West. And the reason I was going there is because I had heard that there was a transgender drop-in night. And so I was like, what a great place to do outreach. So I arrived there, and I'm a pretty shy person for those of you who already know me, and I already had long-time roots in Philadelphia, but I needed to like still learn and connect with the community in this new role. So pretty much immediately after entering the space, there was someone who was very warm and very welcoming and sitting in a chair, this individual, and they just kind of greeted me. And so I went in ready to like tell them all about Leeway and tell them like why they should apply. And I asked them, I asked them if they were an artist. And they said, they practically jumped out of their skin and they were like, me? No! And like that like word, there's something about that word that like they were just like, no, I don't get to identify in this way, right? And it was a very visceral reaction. So they said no, but they also said, but I still want to hear what you have to say. So they let me continue to talk. But what happened is I ended up doing more listening and talking. And what I learned from sitting down with that person is that they were sitting across from a person who's an older Black person. They were HIV and Hep C positive, and they also identified as female at the time. They had been publicly speaking in all sorts of different spaces about their experience as a trans person who wanted to do medical transition, but was worried about the complications of trans medical hormones and their different statuses. And so they had a lot of concerns and hopes and dreams and all of the things, but had been doing a lot of video documentation during that time of their journey. And so at some point after listening to them, I was able to connect some of the dots, and I was thinking that what they were doing was using media to tell their story. And it was a story that I personally had never heard before. So what they had been doing by documenting their story was using an art form to talk about their experience of living at the intersection of oppression while bravely trying to shift culture and create social change. By the end of that conversation, they laughed and they said something like, well, shoot, maybe I am an artist, after we talked more about what they were doing. And it was amazing to go through the applications weeks later and to see that they did apply for an Art and Change grant. And I was so excited that they applied. So I'm not sure where this person is today, but I remember so vividly how excited that person was to be seen, how excited that person was to be invited in, and how excited that person was to be valued for who they were, as well as like what they had to contribute to the world. So, Trans Justice Funding Project uses a community-led process, something that I learned from being a staff member at the Leeway Foundation, and we're eternally grateful for Leeway providing such a powerful and transformative model. And what I've learned from working with communities across the country for nearly 20 years is that as humans have the power to create transformative spaces. We've seen this time and time again. And it just really makes us better. And I'm reminded again and again that culture shift is possible. and it absolutely matters, especially when done thoughtfully and in meaningful ways. So I'm gonna wrap this up really quickly, don't worry. So as we gather like here in this space today, it's in 2018 to still have the conversation about how not to exclude certain groups of people, in particular trans people. We're still having the conversation about not erasing or devaluing trans people in communities. And at the same time, I'm feeling, again, grateful for foundations like Leeway and other groups that have been doing some of this deeper work for years and years and years around trans inclusion, as well as constantly being bold enough to not only have these conversations, but to be leading through actions. Everything from community assessment to hiring staff, trans people on staff members to supporting trans artists, and now to providing this amazing toolkit. And I think as the other folks have said on the panel, like it's not, like this resource is a jump off point. And I also want to remind folks that, and just to reiterate what people have already said, is that like this is something that you can revisit and keep coming back to. Not everyone has to reinvent the wheel. A lot of foundation work has already been laid out. And also a reminder that there's also the personal piece of it too, right? There are people from Leeway, there are people like myself who also want to be in it with you in addition to having a toolkit. So I also want to invite people to use the toolkit, but also to have these conversations and keep them alive and keep them going because, again, that cultural shift is possible and it just matters so much. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. I think that really captures a lot of the kind of the feeling that a lot of folks get when it comes to the Leeway Foundation and with other organizations that I think have really done the work to think about what it means to be inclusive and not just inclusive but affirming, right? And so part of what we're thinking about with this guide was diversity, inclusion, equity, that language is sort of everywhere now, and everybody sort of wants a hand in that, but without thinking necessarily about what it means for the folks who are marginalized or who walk into a room expecting not to be seen, understood, heard, and I think that story really highlights that. And I think to think about sort of like the process, I really want to turn to you, Allison, to speak more to the work that you did with the therapy center, just the hard conversations that you had, and as a white cisgender person, like what that looks like and how you see this guide sort of being useful to other folks who don't identify as trans or who might not have access to language or even really know how to talk to trans or non-binary communities.
So yeah, when I finally got a copy of it and started reading it over, I was pretty blown away because both in our organization and when I work with other orgs, the two initial responses I get is people are so overwhelmed that they just kind of get paralyzed and look the other way, and they like call me a year later. Or the bigger one I get is that it's not a big deal. Like, I'm affirming. Why do we have to like look at our policies? Let's just take it as it comes. Let's do it on a case-by-case basis. And as some of us know, that can become really dangerous and it cause a lot more harm. So I feel like the guide really is a gentle way of saying you have to make this a big deal. You have to go through a process. There's going to be loss. There's going to be pain. Like, you can decide not to do this and it's going to be painful, and you can decide to do this and it's going to be painful. But that you can't really avoid that. I think Amber said something about like if you're not uncomfortable, then you're not really doing the work, or maybe one of you all said that. And I really do believe that. Just unconsciously, probably as a cis person, I tried to do it without pain, and I think I was causing more and more casualties along the way. And so we finally started to get more real in our organization and name that, giving up sort of a second wave feminist model was going to require some grieving for some people, and I was going to lose some people. I think that, like you all have alluded to, the word inclusion, I think when people use that term, they don't really realize that there are some things that they're going to have to step away from and give up. we lost a number of our funders. We lost a number of our donors. I had staff people leave, and we had to keep going back to why this mattered, why this was important, and keep readdressing and recommitting to ourselves, how we were going to stay grounded in it. So.
I think, given that, one question that I want to ask all the panelists is, can we talk about a time that was uncomfortable or really challenging in thinking about inclusion? That can either be from the perspective of pushing folks to be more inclusive or affirming in their practices, or a time when you were challenged personally to say like, oh, I thought I understood your experience, but I need to sort of change my approach for X, Y, and Z reasons. And I think given that, like, how might the guide sort of help to push people through those kinds of conversations?
So I have lots of examples. I'll give you two and then I'll shut up. One was so we put it in our strategic plan to consider becoming trans-affirming. We went through a year of training and conversations with our board and staff, and then we took a vote. And the vote ended up being unanimously that we were going to be completely trans-affirming. We were going to strive for that. That's the language that we use. And so then I wrote a grant. I wrote lots of grants and finally got one that supported us going through like a needs assessment process to reach out to different community members and come up with a stakeholders group. And we did a pretty good job of getting lots and lots of people in the room. And the grant that I wrote was to do focus groups and to do surveys. So I was really excited, really proud of this. I went in, showed it to them, and instantly got shut down. Everyone in the group was like, you will not survey us one more time. We are so done with that. And so after a lot of conversation and me getting over my panic, I said, okay, what do you think we should do? And they said, you have to be transparent with us. You have to go in front of the community, you have to bring your process, and you have to ask us what we need. And so we did end up doing that. We did a community forum at William Way, and there were probably like 50% providers there, some trans and non-binary identified, and then 50% community members. And we went through sort of our history, how we got to today, what our hopes were, what we felt naive about. I was working pretty closely with a trainer who was an out trans man. And so he kind of named like what he thought some of the issues were too. And then we got a ton of feedback and a ton of painful feedback that we really needed to take on. And so that was one lesson, I think, that we learned the hard way, but that we learned and made us a lot stronger. And then the second example, which is really interesting, we had come up when we were trying to decide, before we had taken the vote, we had formed this internal committee. And one of the therapists on the committee actually raised her hand and was like, I really feel like this is a specialty. Like, I don't understand why we all have to become trans-affirming. Like, isn't this similar to like DNA issues or disordered eating? Like, can't we choose? And, inside I was like, but I realized like I had to use that. Like, it was a moment for me to flex my muscle. Like, I had to get real. I had to be able to articulate back to her, why did this need to be institutionalized? Why did we all have to do this? Why was it it's not an option if we're really gonna do trans justice work. Like, we were already working from a gender place, as a kind of historically feminist organization. And so it really forced me to articulate why we were claiming this at a root, like a mission level. And so I guess that's one thing that I feel like the manual really pushes you to do. To don't just check off some boxes, but to really decide, like, how does this fit with your mission? And why are you going to go through this painful work? Why is it that important? And I feel like each one of you have to have your own answer for that. So those are two examples.
I think, that's really important. I think that one of the things that has been difficult for me is to, like it is for a lot of us, to admit that you don't have all the answers and that you were wrong in certain cases. And it's been difficult. I transitioned 10 years ago, and it's been a personal journey, and also a journey of being re-socialized in different ways, but also to learn not to project my own experience of being trans onto other people who are trans-identified. And when I transitioned, a mentor of mine, I had to figure out how I was going to transition on my job, and so that involved a lot of bureaucratic work, which is why you want to have policies in place for your employees to ease that burden. Having gone through that, it is truly a lot of work and very difficult and very taxing. But my point there is that my mentor said to me, you know, the biggest obstacle that you're going to confront here is that people they want to know what they have to do differently. And they're going to be afraid to ask, and they're not going to be wanting to be wrong. It doesn't feel good to have made a mistake. And so that was very important for me to hear. And even to this day, I mean, I'm like all of you, I mean, I make mistakes in lots of different ways, but also with regard to gender pronouns, and I make bad assumptions, and that's been a process for me. So I think a certain amount of humility is really required here, and I think that this guide does a very good job of that, about telling in our own words some of the difficulties that we've encountered. Nobody has all of the right answers. It's not like a thing that you just do A, B, C, and you're done. But I think the process of introspection is really important, and there's a part in the guide that talks about misgendering somebody, and the importance of pausing and apologizing and then moving on. Most of us want to just say, oh, I made a mistake, and just keep on going. But I think that's a small thing, but it's really, really important. And it kind of goes, it's something that everybody can relate to, right? Because we all sort of have egos, and it feels terrible to have made a mistake. And we want to just forget it and move on. But the better thing is to admit the mistake and to show by example how others can also do that. So.
I have tons of examples, but I'm not going to bore you with all of them. But one thing that really sticks out to me is when I've gone into organizations to talk about them becoming more diverse and being more inclusive, they have this short list of things that they think that means, that they're going to have to do. And what we find is that they think if they train front of the house or just the folks that are going to be interacting with public, but they don't train the security officers, the janitors, all the other people that those folks that are going to be engaging with their organization are going to come in contact with. So you have to do from front of the house to the back of the house. And if you're not doing that, then you're missing a huge chunk of what has to be done. And what I like about this guide is in those cases, a lot of that is not done because security officers are third party. You know, a lot of them are unionized. So having things like this in place is something that you can say, hey, we can't require you to go to these trainings, but we have this here that you can reference. And if you don't get it right then we're gonna need to take further steps. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah, those are all really great examples, and I appreciate the connections to like what the guide talks about in ways that, people are sort of, it's ongoing conversations, ongoing struggles with, coming to terms with like, okay, I didn't realize that, as a trans person, I could still misgender somebody, or I could still, step out of line, but all of these things happen when it comes to dealing with difference in general, right? And I think that, I hope that this guide is sort of one way of approaching that. I want to turn to Gabriel, because one of the things that you have been really proactive in doing is speaking with other folks in philanthropy about transjustice, transgender, nonconforming communities, and I wonder how you see this guide sort of helping those folks who are funders who are doing that work, and because it's often a sort of closed door process that people don't necessarily know a lot about, and a lot of times people assume that they're not going to be able to have access to funders, or not be able to trust that a funder is going to know who they are, what they're doing, and organizations like TJFP and Leeway, and even Bread and Roses and other organizations that have done really intentional processes around inclusion have tried to challenge that, but I think broadly speaking, philanthropy as a field that's really trying to grow and change in that direction. So I wonder how you see this guide sort of having an effect there.
Sure. A lot of different thoughts about this. As a trans person who is often in spaces as the only trans ED or like one of two, I guess now maybe three, out trans EDs in philanthropy, it can feel like a little bit of a lonely space. And for me, like this work is not over there. It's like personal, like the people I work with and for and like alongside my community. So there isn't always a boundary of like us and them. It is us at all times. So I often am talking to other funders about, I have to be like really frank and really real. Like, well, some people, and I'm saying specifically around in funding circles for me, like, people are still trying to figure out like how to make things inclusive or how to make grants available to trans communities. And while people are still struggling in some of those ways around like how to do applications and all those other things, and have to remind people that a lot of our folks are literally dying while people are struggling to figure this stuff out. And I want to say that again, they are literally dying while people are trying to figure this stuff out. So I think that having a guide like this is helpful in a lot of ways, but it also just makes me personally not feel so alone in this conversation. It's nice to have a tool, something to give to someone to like visit and revisit. But at the end of the day, like I really hope that it doesn't just live on people's shelves. It doesn't just live on people's desks, that they know that there are whole communities being affected by whether or not we choose to have these conversations and we choose to be active. So again, I'm really thankful from a deep personal place to have something to refer people to and also to work from. And I also just wanted to point out too, there's a section that highlights kind of like the cycle. I think it's particularly around the prison and I just, in terms of like in the funding world, when I worked at the Silver River Law Project, we were trying to get people to understand cycles of oppression, right? Like how people don't just wake up one day and decide that they want to go to prison, but there's a lot of factors, there's a lot of things that happen throughout life that can lead a lot of oppressed folks through this cycle again and again. So I was happy to see this in this space too, and in this conversation, particularly around the funders, because the way I think of it in my work now is like how trans communities even have access or don't have access to applying for funding, right? Like myself included, I didn't finish high school. I didn't go to school to be in philanthropy. A lot of folks that I work with, they didn't choose to become, they didn't just go to school to become community leaders. They did it out of necessity. They did it because they needed to come up with solutions and to find answers for their communities, to serve their communities. And so I also hope that people will start to think too about like what it means to have barriers that don't allow trans people to access funding. And so again, just to want to highlight that section because I was really happy to see that, to help people connect the dots and make the connections around like how some of these systems even work and how we participate in them so that we can break free from them and better serve our communities and the communities that we care to serve.
Yeah, I really appreciate, thank you so much for that. I think a lot of conversations in philanthropy end up sort of missing that piece, like the structural piece in some ways, like they, I think, attempt to talk about it through talking about funding, but don't necessarily get to like, we're talking about inclusion, we're talking about giving away money and moving money, but we're not talking about sort of like where and how that trickles down. And I'm really grateful to Leila Abdelzarak for putting these amazing illustrations together. She's an artist, I think now based out of Detroit, formerly was in Chicago, Palestinian American activist. Really was an exciting process to put some of these pieces of the guide together. I want to ask a couple more questions before we move to the Q&A. Keith, as somebody who's written about sort of cultural competency for organizations and written like a workbook and guide yourself to help organizations, where do you see this guide sort of like fitting and circulating in relationship to other resources that are out there, and how yeah, who would you like most want to give this to in the work that you do?
Well, I think that the people in the room right here probably is a very good start, and social justice organizations, and then all of the constituencies that you deal with. So I think this goes back to a point that we talked about earlier. I think this guide is for people who are partway there, are sort of wanting to do the right thing, or they're wanting to learn, but they're also realize they don't have all the answers. And so I think, as Selena pointed out earlier, it's the perfect size and weight and everything. I mean, it's a really good thing that you give people. And also to pick up on something that you said that I think is really important about people who might be custodial staff and people, security guards, other people, might be third-party employees. It's always better to give people something like this than to give them a lawsuit. Tend to respond a little better. And that's something that I try to emphasize in my work. I think I want to be proactive, and I want for organizations and businesses to be proactive, to think about the benefits that can accrue from going through this process. It requires a level of introspection that can actually help every organization and business better identify their own goals. And then they can ask the question, how, if at all, does gender matter to this particular organizational goal? I thought the example in the book of job requirements was really, really important about this sort of, the way that we use a college education as a proxy for, you must be somebody that we would want to interview for this job. And instead of doing that, thinking about particular positions and what the skill sets are that are required for the job and doing it well, and then rethinking and thinking about, maybe we need to use a different kind of sorting mechanism.
Well, we need a master's to answer the phone.
And kind of getting back to what Gabriel said also, that just there are so many people who have been left out of formal educational institutions, for example, but have life experience and community experience and job experience that's really important. And I think doing the extra work, this is important because it can seem like too much work, but I think that it's not. If you actually just kind of sit down and you rethink a job description, it doesn't take all that much time. It can be really rewarding for the institution, and you can get a better person for the job.
I think that the piece that, I think Chris Bartlett's here, I think I found him. Hi, oh, thank you, I think I interviewed Chris last fall, and he's done a lot of really great work with William Way to sort of make it a community center that doesn't sort of just look like white gay men, which is often what you see, but actually one that has made a lot of strides in sort of welcoming folks, and it's an ongoing process everywhere, and I think Chris would be the first to say it's ongoing work for him as well at William Way, but certainly the sort of the talking about hiring practices and saying, what's the purpose of having these sort of institutional markers of like a bachelor's or a master's or X amount of this kind of work experience or that kind of thing, and who does that exclude? And other kinds of pieces of organizational work that that we have all these assumptions around that are, gendered, racialized, classed, etc. And I hope that a lot of these conversations and people's words in here really push people to rethink the ways that they're thinking about hiring practices, even just as a starting point for what organizations are doing. The last question I want to ask, and I want to start with you, Selena, but ask the whole panel since everyone has been here in Philly or is here in Philly, is to sort of bring it home and say, why is this a guide that comes out of Philly? Like, what does that mean to you, and how do you see Philly as a city that's doing this work? Maybe differently than other places, or even just in your experience, like how is Philly the site for organizational changes that have happened and hopefully will continue to happen?
I'm from North Carolina, so Philly is completely different. It's like night and day. I think this is important and to that because a lot of organizations believe that inclusion means welcoming. and there's a big difference. You know, I can be welcome into anybody, but how you treat those folks once they're in your establishment is where the inclusion begins. You know, how you address them, how you know, all of those things make a difference. Coming from North Carolina, I know what it's like to have no resources. As you all know, I'm pretty familiar with the whole bathroom situation down there. I'm one that I'm not going to argue with you about the bathroom. I did not just start using it. So, having things like this, I'm going to go where, hey, I can go right here. I'm going to go. But I think Philly, the difference is in Philly, folks aren't taking things lying down. They're fighting, they're challenging folks, they're holding folks accountable. That's what I love about this city. I come from, when I came here, I was misgendering folks. I was making all the mistakes, and I was really getting it hard because as a trans-identified woman, folks expected me to know everything. You know, but even in that sense, we have to realize that folks, even trans-identified folks, not gender non-conforming folks, everyone comes from different backgrounds and different places and have different experiences. The trauma is even different. So there is no cookie cutter solution to any of this, but this guide serves as a foundation, which is what we all need. We all have to start somewhere.
Do other folks have thoughts on well, Philly and other places you've like lived and known and seen, and just where the work sits in relationship to that?
I mean, I've been in Philly now for about 13 years, and I was in the Midwest before that, and I grew up in Canada. My experience having transitioned here in Philly, it was as I said, a difficult experience in a lot of ways, but I had a lot of support, and it was the time when I got involved with activism in the community, with T-Man, the Transmasculine Alliance Advocacy Network, which was and still is going for transmasculine folks of color. Really important because we need information, and the sharing of that information meant the world to me. And so I think paying that forward is important, and I think that, I think that the activist network in Philadelphia is pretty rich. It doesn't mean that there aren't disagreements and issues and tensions, but it's wonderful. I think that this guidebook will fall into the right hands and be used by a lot of people.
Gabriel, since you have done work all over the country around trans justice, where do you see Philly fitting in that, in sort of the big map of work that's happening all over the country?
You can tell me if I'm not answering your question, but what I want to say to that is that, or I want to start off by saying that one of the things that I do in my job is we do listening tours. So we're a no strings attached funder, and so we don't, we cut the check and that's it, and we leave it up to the groups to be in touch with us if they want to be in touch with us, but we really want to trust and believe in trans leadership and not do that in a paternalistic kind of way. So when we do our listening tours, which we do every couple of years, where we get to do a 2-week tour, prioritizing areas that are under-resourced or a lot of people in urban hubs don't often talk about, or places where we have never received applications. So I'm talking about South Dakotas, I'm talking about Oklahoma's, parts of the Southwest. We've been, in the Deep South, we've been all over, just listening and learning from these different folks, in their living rooms, in the parks, wherever they're located, because a lot of them don't have offices. And so it's been really amazing to learn the country in this particular kind of way. And one of the things that I've noticed, or that shows up again and again and again, is that even though there is a lot of trans justice work happening, more than I think most people are aware of, this year alone we received 216 applications, and these are from groups that have budgets of $250,000 to zero. So these are grassroots groups. They don't always know, at least in my experience, that there's so much more happening. And again, I think that there is a power to knowing that like you're not alone, and the power that comes from these groups knowing that even though they feel very isolated, their work is not within the work is happening. So I think tools like this are very helpful to like give to them and to like so that they can use them in their respective homes and areas. But I also think it helps affirm that there is a movement, that people are in conversation about like trans inclusion and not, like you said, not just welcoming people, but actually integrating and involving people in processes and conversations and strategies in the infrastructure. And I think that that's really important reminder. So I see this as a potential to like help that be an additional reminder to people that this, and help and that they can make sense for wherever they are, right? Because there is no one size fits all. I think someone mentioned that on the panel, but I hope that this is something that people also learn how to use in their respective areas too. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, B, but that's one way I see like this. And again, as a funder, like I get to use this tool with other funders, but I'm also excited to use it with grantees and applicants, and like, as I say, the people on the ground who need this just as much.
Yeah, that definitely answers the question and gets at a lot of really important themes just around, trans justice and what it can and does look like across the country. And, it's not, this is one guide that, can circulate and will circulate and, make clear the work that's happening in Philly, but also show that, people aren't alone, wherever they are doing this kind of work and asking really important questions about like inclusion, affirmation, difference, etc. Right? So I really appreciate that.
Oh, one more thing. I know that I live in New York, but I'm also always so excited to see things not coming out of New York or like the Bay. So I'm especially excited to see something coming out of Philadelphia that will go far and wide. So just props to Philly. Yeah.
Appreciate it. Somebody picked Philly as a field site and got so many questions like, why are you doing research there? And I'm like, look around the room, it's really clear to me. So I appreciate that. So we have some questions that came in on note cards. We got one that's kind of a logistical question that I'll just answer really fast. That asked, how can organizations use some of the content from the guide? In other words, can we copy and paste or paraphrase?
Use our own policy manuals.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it is, I think, be in conversation with folks from Leeway as that's happening, so we know, where specific, if it's a direct quote or something, where it's circulating, but, as long as the citation practices are ethical, I don't see why you wouldn't be able to do that. It would be silly, I think, if we were really protective around like where it went. This whole launch is, I think, about sharing and making sure, voices are heard and people have access to this material. So yeah, I'd say, cite it widely just as long as it doesn't go without appropriate credit to the Leeway Foundation and the amazing work. Oh, I have lots of questions now. All right, I'll start with the one that I've been looking at, which is how do generational differences within trans and queer communities affect inclusion efforts? So I don't know who wants to tackle that. It's a big and really important question. Oh.
Am I the oldest person? One of the things that I deal with as a professor, obviously, and I've been teaching now, I'm 48, so I've been teaching for almost 20 years now. And so I'm constantly seeing the shifts in language in particular. We talked about that earlier, you did, I think. So my students, it's humbling and also a reminder that things are in flux. And I think that's something that we can, I know as you get older, you're a little bit more set in your ways, or you want to be hip and you realize you're not. And nobody wants you to be hip, so. But to think about the shifts in language, not as like, oh no, now, I'm getting chastised for using the wrong term, and why do I have to do this? To really see that it's an indication that that the concepts are in flux and it means something to evolve with the language. It's not just about being politically correct, that horrible term that I hate, but but it means something that the terms are moving and they're shifting and there's so I think rather than to brace yourself against that or bristle, to really embrace it and to think about why there are changes. We used to use the term transsexual, that used to be an acceptable, right term to use. It's not anymore. Why is that? Let's talk about that. So I think that just some of the generational stuff, for older people to be more open to having conversations with younger people about why do they think that the term is outdated and we should use a different.
We can't hear you back there. Can you bring your mic closer?
I don't want to repeat everything. Because it took up a lot of time. Sorry, but I will in the future.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I think it was Gabriel who said something about, it not reinventing the wheel, and I think that's something, I appreciate the perspective of saying, like, older folks sort of sharing space and saying, well, this is my experience, and this is how it's different from how I see young people sort of grappling with questions of gender, sexuality, et cetera, today. But also for young people to like look around and see what's come before you and see what what sort of resources have already been created. We have a really amazing resource in the Wilcox Archives at the Leeway Center that I use a lot for my research, but they're also like publicly available, and I would recommend them for folks who are like, oh, I really want to, think about, trans communities in Philly, or, are thinking about doing work. So much has come before this moment, and I think it's really important to always sort of look back to that at the very least, if not to really credit it for how things have gotten to be the way they are today, right? So, yeah, I just want to add to that.
One of the things that I love about working at the William Way Community Center is that they are always trying new ways to, with the intergenerational programming. Getting younger folks and older folks to understand one another is it can be challenging. I've been challenged with doing this at William Way and my other job when I worked at Mazzoni Center. I did a lot of intergenerational programming and having activities where you just kind of like trying to compare terminology that the older folks use as opposed to what the younger folks are using to describe the same thing. And allowing them to see that and how, the similarities that they have is one way that we were able to connect those two generations. And I love the fact that William Way continues to do that and continues to be affirming and step outside of the box and take chances on people like me.
We have a whole bunch of really great questions that are coming in, so I want to try to give time for things. And so it's going to be a reception that we'll get to in a little bit, so there'll be time for folks to ask individual questions of panelists if there's things that you really want to talk about, or stay in touch and all that. And I know Gabriel is not here with us today, but is available, I think, via email, internet, I don't know.
Oh, I'm Skyping into the reception.
Just go up to the computer.
Yeah, I'll be at the bar.
One question that's come in a few different forms that I want to make space and time for is, folks have talked about coming from positions of being a lower level employee at a small startup, and someone asked a question about being in an organization where upper management is not as invested in the work, and also just sort of the starting place for this. And I want to open that question up. I know it's a hard one, and it's definitely one that there probably isn't one clear answer to, but if folks have thoughts or perspectives on that, what it looks like to try to do this work from a place that's not necessarily like executive director or, even like director of something, or, folks have thoughts and feelings on that.
I mean, it really depends on the organization, and how it's structured and what the hierarchy looks like. So I've had, consulting experiences where an affinity group, an LGBTQ affinity group, whether it's like an investment bank, it's like brought me in, and then learned about the strategies that they were going to employ, about sort of, what I could help them with, and they could translate that into, delivering the information, the recommendations to their within their organizational structure. So I think it really depends on what that looks like, you know.
Use your mic.
Yeah, no, I think it's, you know, for a lot of, it's, you know, it's learning the sort of ins and outs of wherever you're working. Like, a lot of, we're talking about institutional change, which doesn't happen with one person, it doesn't happen with like one, you know, guide even, right? Like it's ongoing processes, and I think knowing, you know, what do you have access to, who do you have access to, and how do you like just start conversation. And you know, for the folks who are talking about being sort of separate from upper management or separate from higher level decision making, that's a really real concern. But I think, you know, knowing where your resources are, whether that's HR or like a consultant who can come in and say, you know, let's talk to this affinity group about what kinds of things they can post upper management. And you know, sometimes organizations are not going to budge, and that's not going to be on you as an employee of that organization. You don't have to speak for the, you know, institutional like issues that you're dealing with, but you can, I think, try to move from where you are. And I think this guide like is a resource that, like, I think I like that people use the word gentle. That makes me really happy as somebody who put, you know, the words on the page for it. Like it, I think to sort of say like, hey, you know, this amazing resource came out. Like, do you want to read it? Do you want to have a conversation about it? I think it's something that an organization should like talk about more, and use it as a starting point, at least to even if you don't want to be the person, like especially if you're like a person of color or transgender non-conforming person, or like lower level person, and you don't know how to, you know, navigate that thing. Like I say, like use resources that are out there, like the guide, to say like, hey, I read this and I think you would appreciate it, you know, and start there and see, you know, what kind of feedback you get.
I think, I know I plan to, I actually spoke at an organization earlier today that they're wanting to be more inclusive. And I mentioned that we were having this launch tonight, so I think I'm going to hand deliver these to them as soon as I'm ready.
We got a few logistical questions about the guide. Just sort of like, is this the first of its, has any other organization released a guide like this? Why is it specifically for arts and culture organizations and nonprofits, as opposed to like all workplaces? And then sort of questions about distribution and all of that stuff. I think, from what I know, and you know, you can correct me if I'm missing things, but there is an online version of this. It'll be available through the Leeway website. It's going to be on Issue, I think, which is how the website that Leeway, all of Leeway sort of resources and brochures and booklets and stuff are all available through. I know that like I'm available as a resource to like speak individually with people, and Keith does consulting work. Other folks in the past have do consulting work as well. Selena's done 1.5 million trainings throughout Philly. So, and you know, Gabriel's spoken with lots of different folks in philanthropy. So people on this panel, and then people we know, and there's a lot of people mentioned in the guide as well who do this work, who can sort of help with using the guide as a jumping off point and or using their own resources. And it's certainly, I wouldn't say it's like the first ever thing that ever addressed these issues, because that would, you never want to say you're the first if you don't really know, but it's dangerous. But I think what's special and important and timely about it is that we are in a moment where people actually want to be in the room for this kind of conversation, and I do think that feels like, if not the first, it feels first-like. So that feels important to mention. And the reason it's sort of designated to who it's designated towards is because Leeway started with what they know, you know, and I think there's lots of ways that it could be adapted to other kinds of workplaces, but that's, you know, every organization and institution is really specific, and that's why, you know, different people have tried to sort of address it from different angles. There's all kinds of trans competency literature all over the internet. Some of it's great, some of it's not. But, you know, this is one place that I think, like, if Leeway is an organization that you trust, if people that work with Leeway are people that you trust, this is a great place to start. So yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap up. Thanks, Steve. So we're going to have our reception now. So folks will be available to chat and, you know, talk through stuff about the guide. Oh, and yes, Also, the Leeway Foundation is celebrating its 25th year this year, and there's an anniversary exhibit called Making Space, Leeway at 25, that's available for public viewing for an extra hour today, especially because of this event, which is at across the Benjamin Franklin Parkway at the Moore College of Art and Design, and the galleries will remain open today. So feel free to check that out. Till 6, thank you. So check that out if you haven't already. And thank you all so much again for being here. We're really excited to keep this conversation going. Thanks so much.